If you're trying to figure out where to live in Atlanta, I've got the 5 most underrated suburbs of Atlanta for you. These suburbs are not the ones that everyone is trying to move to, not the ones that everybody is thinking about. Ones that I think you can really get a deal on a home. They're not going to be the one where you're competing with a bunch of buyers for homes. These cities really get overlooked a lot, and you can find great homes and a great area to live. What's up, y'all? My name is Victor with Atlanta Suburban Living. We put out videos every week about what it's like to live in Atlanta and the suburbs of Atlanta. The first underrated suburb that I really think you need to take a look at is the city of Smyrna. Smyrna is in Cobb County, kind of northwest of the Atlanta area. And so this is a city that has really experienced a lot of revitalizing in the last couple decades. It used to be a city that you kind of wanted to stay away from. Maybe it wasn't like the nicest part of town, but it has become an area where you have a lot of young people moving to. You also have a lot of people who are wanting to be close to Atlanta. So you have a lot of professionals who live in the Smyrna area because you can find homes that won't break the bank, but you're still close enough to Atlanta. So you're not driving an hour and a half to get to Atlanta. This is like one of the biggest pulls, one of the biggest tensions with residents of Metro Atlanta. It's like, how do I find affordable homes and not be stupid far away from Atlanta, because I work in Atlanta and I'm gonna have to make that drive regularly. And like, sure, I can find affordable homes, in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, but I want to be able to find that closer to Atlanta. And so Smyrna is the answer to this question, or one of the answers to the question. There are other suburbs. Smyrna's not the only one, but Smyrna is a great option for that. You can find homes there in the 400,000s, and you don't have to be super far from Atlanta. In addition to that, they've done so much work on the city. They've got an excellent downtown area with a bunch of mom and pop shops, a bunch of local commercial areas. And so you're not having to like pour money into these big box stores, even though you're close to the city of Atlanta. They have a great community feel as well in Smyrna. This is certainly something that really marks this area. There's a lot of people who kind of I don't know, maybe you could kind of say they've taken a risk on Smyrna, because again, Smyrna kind of had a negative connotation for many decades, but it has changed so much. It has come a long way. And so those people that took a risk on Smyrna years ago, maybe decades ago, they're now seeing their city become so much better. And so they have a lot of pride for their city. And so that community feel among Smyrna residents is something that you don't find in other parts of Metro Atlanta. The general vibe of the city kind of has a bit of a city living. It is a suburb, but there are many parts of it that have a bit more of a densely populated city kind of lifestyle where you can walk very easily. You're not having to drive super far to a grocery store. You're not having to drive far to work or to the public school or whatever. Like, everything is a bit more densely compact, and so it's much more convenient. Convenience is certainly something that I would say you find more of in Smyrna, and so it has less of that kind of suburban life where you live in a neighborhood and you got to drive super far to a grocery store. Not like that in Smyrna. Everything is much closer together. Number 2 on the list of the most underrated suburbs of Metro Atlanta is Cartersville. If you're thinking about moving to Cartersville or any one of these suburbs, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. I'm a local real estate agent here in the area. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. Even if you just have a question about what it's like to live here, happy to answer your questions. But Cartersville is an excellent suburb that not very many people think about. In fact, Cartersville is one of these farther out suburbs. It is kind of a far distance from Atlanta, and so you typically would not be living in Cartersville and working in Atlanta. That would be way too long of a commute. It's certainly possible, but I wouldn't suggest it. Very often people who live in Cartersville work in a more nearby suburb like Marietta, or maybe they work in Canton or one of these other bigger suburbs that are closer to Cartersville. Also, you could be working in the city of Cartersville. Cartersville has plenty of economy, plenty of industry to support the residents who live in that area. And so this is not something that you find typically in the suburbs that are far out from Atlanta, an hour or two away from Atlanta. You don't typically find a lot of industry, a lot of economy. Cartersville, however, is the exception. They have plenty of job, plenty of employers, plenty of business to support the people who live in Cartersville. I mean, imagine living in one of these small towns where you get that small town vibe and you could drive 5 to 10 minutes to work. You'd be the envy of all Metro Atlanta residents to be able to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm putting Cartersville on the list. Now, of course, these 5 underrated suburbs are just my opinion. You might totally disagree. Feel free to let me know in the comments which ones you think are better than the ones that I've listed. But Cartersville is certainly an excellent underrated suburb that not very many people think about. It does have that suburban feel, unlike Smyrna, which has more of a city feel. Cartersville is much farther away, so it does have that suburban, even more country feel in certain parts of Cartersville. Like if you lived on the outskirts of the city, you would be super secluded and you could drive, a short drive into the city, into the middle of Cartersville. But if you lived far out there, you would have that country secluded feel. And so the general vibe there in Cartersville is much more quiet country living than Smyrna, or certainly much more quiet suburban living than Atlanta. Another suburb that I think is really underrated, not talked enough about, is the city of Duluth. Duluth is in Gwinnett County in the northeast part of Metro Atlanta, but this is a very diverse area with Gwinnett County schools, which are some of the highest rated, and it's not far from Atlanta. Again, relatively speaking, I mean, it is far from Atlanta. If you plan on walking to work, then yeah, living in Duluth and working in Atlanta would be impossible. But I mean, generally, Gwinnett County is known to be far from Atlanta. Like if you lived in Beaufort or if you lived in Suwanee, you're talking about an hour to an hour and a half commute to get to Atlanta. And so Duluth is much closer and it's much easier to get to the city of Atlanta from Duluth. In addition to that, you have the excellent schools, you have the low crime, the family-friendly atmosphere. All of these things can be found in Duluth. And they also have an excellent downtown area with lots of these kinds of mom and pop shops. Eddie's Attic, I believe, is still there in Duluth. This is like a live music concert venue that they have. And then also the diversity is something that I would certainly say is a major part of living in Duluth. That kind of racial, cultural diversity that's super important to many people. You can find that in Duluth more so than other parts of Metro Atlanta. Number 4 on the list of the 5 most underrated suburbs is Powder Springs. This is one of my favorite suburbs in all of Metro Atlanta, but it just doesn't get the attention that some of the other suburbs get. I mean, Powder Springs is in Cobb County. I think parts of it are in Cobb, parts of it are in Paulding, but there's parts of Powder Springs that are in Cobb County, but because there are so many other great cities in Cobb County, Marietta, Kennesaw, Ackworth, many people just kind of forget about Powder Springs, but it's an amazing suburb with that kind of family-friendly feel that many people are looking for. And you have the famous Cobb County Public Schools for Powder Springs. And so because so many people overlook this city, you can find homes there in Powder Springs, 300, 400,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then for a 4-bed, 3-bath, you're looking at something like 500,000 or 600,000 for a home. This is a great deal compared to some of the other suburbs that have lots of buyer demand, where you're looking at closer to 700,000 or 800,000 for a 4-bed, 3-bath in like Marietta or Alpharetta or Roswell. You're going to have to pay much more for these homes in these suburbs because everybody wants to live there. But Powder Springs has so many of the same amenities as these more popular suburbs, but you're not going to break the bank to buy a home. And in general, the cost of living is a little lower in Powder Springs than some of the other suburbs. A common thing that we see, this kind of correlation between the home prices and the school ratings. And so you typically see that like the areas with the higher school ratings have higher home prices. And the lower school ratings have lower home prices. But Powder Springs is kind of the exception to that. They have Hillgrove High School, which is a 9 out of 10. but the home prices are still much more affordable. So that's another reason why I think Powder Springs is super underrated. To be in a Cobb County school and not have to pay super high for a home, that's Powder Springs is a great option for that. And then the last Atlanta suburb that I think is super underrated on my list here is Sugar Hill. Sugar Hill is also pretty close to Atlanta compared to other suburbs, easy access to Atlanta. There's so many great things about living in Sugar Hill, but nobody really even thinks about it. It's an excellent option if you are looking for an area where you have that kind of diversity and family friendly atmosphere and safe and like public schools and plenty of economy. Sugar Hill is a great option for that. But there are some downsides to living in Sugar Hill, for sure. There's some things that you really need to kind of stay away from, like any city. So I've made a whole video where I talk about the pros and the cons of living in Sugar Hill. You can check out that video right here. I'll see you in the next one.